Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Qasim Khan from US Bank. And Qasim, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. Thanks for having me today. So I'm based out in Chicago. I work in my current role as a Chief Information Officer for wealth, corporate, commercial, and institutional banking businesses at US Bank. I've been with the bank for about now 12 years.
Awesome. And the reason I invited Qasim is as a CIO. All of us tech services companies, we are really interested to learn how to sell to enterprise. And Qasim, as his expertise on his other side, and a very deep understanding of financial services, he's volunteered to share some of what he would expect to see. So, thank you so much for doing this interview for us, Qasim. Can you tell us a bit about your background in financial services? You have quite some history there.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I started early on in the healthcare, and now that I look back, I mean, it was about 2005-ish when I transitioned to the financial services in the banking, and I started with LaSalle Bank. It turned out to be quite a year and a half right after that, as we entered into the credit crunch or the famous 2007 8, one of the widespread economic crisis. So it was tough time. So I made the transition there. It was tough, but on a serious note, it was quite a learning experience for the 3 to 4 years. And since then, I've primarily been on the institutional and the commercial side of the banking. And it's been a very rewarding ride so far in terms of experience, in terms of growth, and in terms of running into a lot of good people along the way.
Thank you. Thank you. And you mentioned that you were in wealth and financial services.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your division? And
Yeah.
also, I would like to hear more about the place of modern tech and how US Bank serves their customers.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm responsible to lead the technology teams that support wealth management, corporate and commercial, and institutional banking. Right, generally known as security services and investment banking. So that's kind of approximately about 40% of the bank, and about one of the three revenue business lines at US Bank that I'm responsible to support from a technology perspective, of course. And the customers, I mean, it's one of the unique areas because we see in interaction with the wealth side, you have a consumer customer base, and then when you go on the corporate, commercial, and institutional, that's more of a commercial and an institutional client base. We have sort of invested quite in terms of enhancing our employees and the client digital experience. From a technology perspective, we are well on our way of cloud journey, if you will. And then specifically to simplify modern tech, we could use it in any which way, but it's really about the customers at the end of the day, right? So be it the consumer or be it or the institutional customer or the client, we sort of advocate and believe that the customer needs to be at the center of anything that we do, because technology is a tool and means to an end, but not an end, obviously, as we know. So that's how we kind of look at it. We are doing a lot of exciting work, but at the end of the day, to simplify, it's all about customer at the end.
Absolutely. So focus on the problem, focus on the customer, keep the customer focused, and
Absolutely.
that's a really good philosophy to have. And so when as you're deploying these new technology, as you're doing a lot of this tech implementation, I'm assuming you use a lot of third-party tech services vendors. Can you tell me more about your expectations from these vendors?
I mean, we do. We are obviously the fifth largest bank. We have a lot of partnerships, and we work with a lot of partners in different capacities. So generally speaking, I think just independent of if it's U.S. Bank or if hypothetically, I would reframe the question, Ali, in the context of as any institution or as anybody look at these vendors or the partners. Of course, they're chosen or they're vetted based on the business need and outcome and a whole lot of different factors. But I think at the end of the day, generally speaking, the critical success factors in terms of any relationship is the sustainability and the trust. So, not that what we expect, but generally in any relationship, I think so long it's founded and rooted in trusted relationship, that where we again, I talk about customer being in the center, and depending on which side you are at, it shouldn't always be about acquiring or selling a product or a service, if you will, right? It's about understanding what is the success for whoever you are servicing. In our case, if we are servicing a customer, we are putting the customer in the center. For any partners, I think as they're looking at what we uh, anybody would want is probably just a relationship where you, which is again rooted in trust and an open dialogue and a communication, where a common goal should be a mutual success, if you will.
Excellent, excellent. And so it shouldn't. It should be very. The best relationships are the ones in which the vendor forget everything else. Their goal is to make US Bank successful.
US
And
Bank or any organization that they're serving or working. Yes,
and successful in terms of business value. So understand the business need and deliver on the business need. If we were to give a
of course,
one sentence summary, got
absolutely. Yep.
it, got it. And you work with many vendors. How do you evaluate vendors for a particular work?
Again, I'll answer that in generally. I mean, like any, without going into the specifics, and obviously I can't touch on how US Bank goes about selecting or our processes in terms of the vendor vetting or the selection. But generally speaking, obviously we have industry leading practices where multiple stakeholders across our bank engage. But again, we got to look at what's the product, what's the need, what are we evaluating. So there is a whole slew of things and the factors and the variables that go into it. So in terms of the overall selection, I would just say it depends really what does the business need, what are we looking for, and like any other institution or company or organization who's looking for any service, obviously it goes through its own course and the process on the way.
Excellent, excellent. And so again, reaffirming the business need. And also, I think you also mentioned multiple people, and thank you for that clarification. Uh, Vixul is I want to move the topic a little bit towards early stage tech services company. And as we've discussed, Vixul is dedicated to helping early stage tech services company. And I think you talked a lot about relationship and trust, and the disadvantage that they're dealing with is they don't have that relationship and trust, right? So my question to you is, when would you choose an early stage company over existing vendors?
I mean, again, I would just say in terms of generally anybody, like just forget US Bank. I would just sort of put this in the context of without giving specificity about the US Bank. I would just say, Ali, look at it in the context of any early stage company, any early stage vendor, and any business, any product has to go through its course to sort of, as they say in a business, the first million is the hardest to make, right?
Mhm.
So we got to be, I would just say, regardless of US Bank or just in general, we should look at it in the context of if you are a fintech or if you are a startup, you got to be very clear about your unique offering. You got to be clear about your value proposition. And you got to be clear about what differentiates you from your competitors. You got to have your competitor landscape pretty well defined around you, if you will. So it boils down to, first of all, as an early stage company, be it whoever, having a clarity of understanding your own strengths first, understanding what are you bringing to the table, and then you have to dissect which players are you going to go, where are you going to have a penetration, and which problem and the gap are you trying to solve. So I would just say those are make it about the success of whoever you're pitching the idea or your product and the service. And of course, if you're starting fresh, you are at a disadvantage in a sense that you don't have a track record. So try and build relationships in the context where you, and then follow through with your track record of delivery, again the trust and the relationships. And of course, if your delivery track record is there, then everything else kind of falls in place.
Got it. And so focus on having a very differentiated value proposition, not something that so Qasim, what you're saying is you need to have the trust, you need to have that unique value proposition to even be considered in the first place, and then after that you have to have a real track record of delivering to that value, not just understanding it and but delivering a solid reputation in that
Absolutely. Yep.
space.
That'll be sort of my advice to anybody who's starting fresh.
And so I'm assuming so in general though it's that phrase that you hear, nobody got fired for. hiring IBM. That is something that a friction that an early stage company, you would say, has to work with, and it's just the
Correct.
reality.
Correct.
So, are you able to help us understand better with an example of when you didn't choose a top five GSI?
And I probably can't share a specific example, obviously in the context of the personal experience, but I can hypothetically give you the answer in the context of when one may or may not choose a specialist, if you will, right? So, I think to me it goes back again, Ali, to understanding your competitive landscape. If you're competing with the whoever you're competing with, how are you going to make an entry, right? So if you're a specialist versus a generalist, it's important to understand how are you going to break in, right? Why would anybody consider you versus any of the established player? And that's like with any other product, right? And a new product emerging in the marketplace have to understand the competitive landscape, have to understand how they're going to penetrate, have to understand how they're going to sort of make an entry, and why would a customer or a consumer on the other end will be convinced. So I would just say it's about making sure you understand the gap you're trying to fill, and making sure that if you're a
Yeah.
specialist in whichever domain or whichever space, you understand the gap that you could solve. Of course, if anybody coming in from that perspective would have that as a basic understanding, if you will. So I would just say I probably wouldn't worry too much about the competition. I wouldn't worry too much about how do I make name into the big space, etc. I would probably look at it in the context of play with your strengths early on. uh, be very clear in terms of what is differentiating you. Again, be very clear the problem you're trying to solve, and then have you just got to have. I mean, with any business, as you know, it's till you sell the first product. It's having a faith and a conviction about what you're trying to do.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And when we're talking about understanding your domain, one thing that I would like your opinion on is the idea of horizontal positioning versus vertical positioning, in terms of having your domain being a deep tech, or having your domain be uh, a deep sector that you're working with. Do you have any comments that you can share on
Yeah, I
that?
mean, at this point, I'm probably repetitive, but if you look at, if I tie back to my comments before, so in my personal opinion, right, you look at if you are in a job or if you are in a company, you often ask yourself a question that, again, back to the generalist and the specialist. Another way to look at it: are you going mile wide, or are you going? You could be mile wide and inch deep, or you could be a mile deep and inch wide. So therefore, it
Hmm.
comes back to where are you going to position, right? You can take any example, a commoditized service. If it's a commoditized service, and if you look at a opportunity is that you have a big pie and you don't mind. There are so many players in there. You're just looking for a smaller pie, smaller share of that pie. In that case, you can go horizontal, right? And you can just say, listen, I'm not differentiating. I'm doing what everybody else might be doing, but I just need to establish myself um, in that bigger piece. And if I get a smaller pie, that's my business plan. I'm okay with it, right? In other cases, you want to establish a product, you want to deliver, you have your unique value proposition, and your domain expertise might be mile deep, inch wide. So therefore, your positioning in terms of engagement, your target customer base, all that changes with that mindset. So I think the punchline here, from my perspective, would be just have that clarity of which side of the dimension you sit on.
Okay. And the other thing I got from that is be as specific as
Correct.
possible. Thank you. That really helps. And as an early stage tech services company, there's um, a lot of them struggle with getting into enterprise. And do you have any advice for them in that process? Like, if they want to shoot for bigger clients, bigger
I
contracts.
mean, again, generally speaking, if just I'll reverse the question, right? Take a hypothetical situation where you're an early startup company and you show up to any of the bigger corporations, regardless of banks or what have you. What are you selling to them, right? The bigger the institution, they're going to want to probably know your track record, who have you worked with, why should they trust you. So the risk element and the variables when you're working with the larger corporations, not like just banks, just generally speaking, changes, right? So you got to be practical about it to just say, why would somebody, what are you offering based on which somebody may want to put the faith and the trust in whatever capabilities or offerings you may have, right? So I would just say, again, back to build some track record and the traction, and go back to a space where you can find an easy entrance. So you got to figure out as an early early player in a product life cycle or what have you, that how can you win. So one of my mentors back in the day told me, you can start any business. Now this is just generally speaking, right? But before you start a business, just make sure you have a simple spreadsheet where you can put all your expenses and income and your first 5 clients. If you cannot do that
Mhm.
exercise, do not start. That means you're not ready. That
Nice.
means you're not ready. So I think I go back to, before we talk about how do you make an entry into the biggest space, etc., it's getting the basics right and the fundamentals of that entrepreneur mindset.
Got it, got it. And so, don't approach the big, don't try and approach and hope for a hail mary with the big customers until you've built that track record. Have you done like maybe in the financial sector, like some smaller banks and
In the
etc.
grand scheme of things, yeah, I mean that's not what I'm saying, but I think it's just in the context of, just be clear, you're whatever you're
Mhm.
offering, because I'm just saying hypothetically you may have an opportunity to target large corporations and the bigger banks, right? But just have that clarity, like I just said in a simple example of, what are you going to say? And if you are not convinced, it's like sports analogy, right? You're walking into the field, and if you're not convinced yourself, then rest doesn't follow.
Got it, got it. And I'm guessing that people will be surprised how easy it is to reach some of the easier fruits and what is actually possible before actually how reachable some of the customers is, instead of looking at the customers that are
Yeah.
totally out of reach.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So long you can
Uh,
find the mutual benefit, right, and the mutual success. Down to my earlier points, I think that's it's got to be a win-win. It can't just be about one way.
So I guess at the risk of being repetitive on my side, if I'm to summarize what you've said, what's really critical is having a killer UVP, and people to some extent, like they should be looking at what their current reach is, and the customers that they can actually reach, and then also there may be you don't question do actively try out and reach people. And I think an interesting thing about that is we're getting into the idea of networking, and I think a lot of that networking actually doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be about business itself, but it can be without the context of business, just getting to know people, building establishing your relationships. I think a lot of us, when we're in our 30s and 40s, we start to develop a lot of relationships with people who are high up in organizations. And if we're active in our communities, we get to do that. I think that actually leads to the how we actually met each other, how we know each other from a personal background. So one disclaimer I have to give: we actually don't have we don't have a business relationship together with US Bank, which is what I really like about that is just how much it shows the universality of what we talk about at Vixul in terms of having a very clear UVP. But Qasim, I think the story how we know each other is actually quite interesting. Do you want to share more
Yeah,
about
no, no.
that?
I mean, if it helps, right? So I think it's the value you added, right? You don't have to aim for an action. Every activity, obviously in the business terms, you can just say, any activity that you perform, you have to have a clear outcome with it. But sometimes there are certain actions we all take that relates to our passion and satisfaction outside our day to day life, right? So as you and I have met was one of the events that I attended through an organization that I'm a board member of, which is Pakistan Children Heart Foundation North America. And that organization is just focused on one single goal, which is helping children who are born with the hole in the heart or the heart related diseases. And our aim is to sort of raise awareness around it. And I think it was Austin where it was one of the events, and I ran into you. And nevertheless, that conversation from a philanthropic effort led into sort of our introduction. So I think the relationships, no matter from wherever they come from, regardless of transactional, you can learn a lot from one another. You have sort of been a successful entrepreneur in your capacity, and we have shared sort of notes and learned from one another over the period of time. But yeah, I would just say the takeaway there is any which way of introduction and the relationships can lead you in terms of not a business transaction, but a lot to learn from one another. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of my passion outside work, which is aimed at children, and specifically, obviously, I'm born and raised in Pakistan, so it's one of my pet passionate project where we are trying to sort of help kids who have illness related to heart.
Thank you. And I think the one thing that really impressed me about the work that PCHF is doing, it's they're like saving lives for next to nothing for the value of what a life is,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it's as they say. I mean, these kids, unlike cancer, these diseases are they can be cured with just a surgery. So, in its true practical form, you are saving a life if you're able to sponsor, if you can sort of somehow get a family or a kid who can afford a healthcare access through this organization, and if they're operated, then you save their life absolutely. And I mean, again, in our sitting here, we are blessed and have access, but in an underdeveloped country, people don't have those resources, right? So, average $3,000 may or may not mean a lot here for us, but that's like a life-saving amount for somebody living in Pakistan.
Literally.
Yes, literally.
Um, okay, well, we're approaching the end of the time we have together. Any final advice that you have for early stage tech services founders?
No, I mean, I would just like to thank you to have me. It's just when the reason I said yes, it's just always good to be able to give back in whichever way and capacity one can. And I think when you approach me with an idea to share whatever little experience I have through the journey of 20 plus years in the financial services, I'm humbled and honored to just be here and just be able to share that, because I know anybody who's trying to do in the early stage startup are much smarter than I am, and they probably don't need much of an advice. So I would just say, very little that I have shared is based on the experience of the different scenarios and the personal journey in the financial services. So I wish everybody who listened to this a luck, and I would just say the final advice is just conviction, and obviously uh, uh, have conviction in what you're doing, and that's why you are early stage startup anyway. So I think the timing of success can be defined. Effort is all is what is in your hands. So just stay true to your conviction, and wish everyone best in terms of the ventures and the endeavors they have.
Thank you. Although I think you're being a little bit too modest there when you're saying that, when you're saying what little experience you have. I think the experience that you have is fantastic,
Thank you.
and it's also something that's very important to Vixul in that we can I can, having sat on this side of the table, I can talk as much as I want, but on what my experiences are. But what really matters is hearing what the other, want to make sure that people know what's there from the people are thinking on the other side of the table. What I know about how you think is just my estimate. It's not what you
Correct,
think.
correct. No, I'm humbled and honored to be able to share that. So thanks for having me, and wish everybody thank you for your time as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to interview you, and I also have to thank US Bank for helping make this interview possible. So, thank you for your
Thanks,
time.
Ravi. Thank you.